Thanks, Jessica Lemaitre in the newsroom. To most here in Europe, when you say South Africa, you naturally think of Nelson Mandela, of the Rainbow Nation that swept away the apartheid regime. A success toasted just recently when the country welcomed the world at the 2010 Football World Cup. Well, now the nation's coming to grips with its worst massacre since the bad old days. The killing of 44 striking mine workers last week, most when police opened fire on rioting picketers. Lonmin, the world's third largest platinum miner, threatening to fire those who stay off the job. Only 1/3 have returned to work. It throws the spotlight on the policies of the ruling ANC these past 2 decades in a nation where the poor, well, have not benefited from huge mineral wealth. Today in the France 24 debate, what the massacre at Lonmin means for the Rainbow Nation. And with us from Johannesburg, Eusebius McKaiser of the Wits Center for Ethics at Witwatersrand University. Thank you for being with us. Also joining us from Cape Town, community developer and blogger Saifo January. Welcome. Sean Jacobs, founder of the influential Africa is a Country blog. He teaches at the New School in New York City. And France 24 Africa editor Ebba Kalando, welcome. The France 24 debate where you can always weigh in on the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter. You can find us at FrancoisF24. Now, the Lonmin mine reopened this Monday. Not enough people showed up to produce platinum ore. While the company has repeated its threat to fire those who don't show, over in Pretoria, meanwhile, relatives were attending the first court hearing for more than 250 who face charges that include murder, attempted murder, and assault. Ebba, it's a bitter rivalry between 2 competing trade unions that sparked all of this.
One could say that, and it's not just about pay and inequality and who is representing whom, which trade union is representing the workers. But I think what people forget sometimes is that the National Union for Mine Workers, which is the biggest affiliate trade union of the big umbrella organization of COSATU, has bargaining powers at Lonmin for the mine workers there. They are the biggest union there with more than 50% of bargaining power, and the Association of Mine Workers and Construction Workers Union, which is a relatively younger union, has only about 30%. So by the time last year in 2011, NUM and Lonmin were able to settle on an 8% wage increase for the rock drillers, which is the fundamental basis of any platinum mining operation. 8%, that would bring their salaries of which were then about 400 euros to about 750 euros.
A substantial raise.
Which is substantial. And that wage negotiation ended successfully. That would then have brought the next wage negotiations only until 2013. So that was a cut and done deal. But what had happened is that in another platinum mine, Impala Platinum, there was a very violent strike where rock drillers there were able, through that very violent industrial action, force management to give rock drillers an increment of up to $9,000. And that's when the Association of Mine Workers and Construction Workers Union came in and probably very cynically told the mine workers that, oh, well, we could raise your wage, or we could fight for a wage increment of up until 12,000
Because those at Impala are making double what they earn now.
Exactly, through violent industrial action. So, and this after the wage negotiations had already ended between Lonmin and NUM. And I think that's when that became the rallying cry. The workers wanted a 300% pay rise. And from then, neither NUM or AMCU could then control the snowstorm that they had started.
And the snowstorm then began, the one-upmanship, and again, last week's massacre, 34 killed on the picket line, the police using live ammunition. On the one hand, we give you some reactions. There's the picketers who remain steadfast in their demand for a tripling of their salary.
We're not going back to work. Some of us were killed. They had no right to kill us. Now they want to fire us.
First, they killed us. Now they want to fire us. They should fire us. We will leave. It's better than dying.
And again, 1/3 of the workers returning to the job this Monday. The boss of Lonmin reiterating the strike is illegal, conceding, though, that this goes way beyond simple pay demands.
It is more than a Lonmin problem. It was triggered by an industrial relations incident, but it's grown beyond that. So absolutely, we've been talking to all of the structures that we should have been talking to.
Saifo, January, did you see this coming?
Mohammed, no, it wasn't actually predictable that such an extent or this kind of violence would come to this kind of violence. But we are indeed being exposed to this kind of threatening kind of behavior that kind of gives hints that somehow things might go wrong. It's become some sort of a tradition whenever there's a strike or protest. It tends to be that kind of violence, which is often characterized by destruction rather than killing.
At the heart of all of this, Ebba, there is the National Union of Mines, and that one-upmanship that you were describing, and the determination we see there. A lot of it centers around the National Union of Mines, which is a trade union confederation close to the ruling ANC.
Well, the National Mine Workers Union is the largest affiliate of the umbrella trade union movement, which is COSATU, which is part of the tripartite government alliance with the government, and therefore very close to Jacob Zuma and the ANC. And COSATU, as the mother organization of the trade union movement in South Africa, which is a historically important participant of the liberation struggle, has had a history of dealing with mine owners, especially with the gold mines during the apartheid era, to be able to have the process of bargaining for terms of conditions of service, whether it be wage increments, and also to avert industrial action. What has happened now is that within the new post-1994 dispensation, the NUM and COSATU has become part of the political environment of statecraft, if you will. And it's unclear that whether this incident at Marikana has come to expose that is NUM playing more politics over and above the interest of the workers that they claim to represent? Or can they control, or do they understand the discontent of the workers that they claim to represent, especially platinum mine workers, which is a new sector of mining in South Africa? Platinum mines and platinum mine workers in South Africa are still the worst paid, and the working conditions there have not improved since 1994, as opposed...
Even though world prices have shot
exactly, up. As opposed to their gold mine counterparts.
As opposed to the gold mine counterparts. In The Guardian last Saturday, South African journalist Justice Malala stressed just how much the Lonmin standoff goes beyond resentment against the National Union of Mines. He writes the following: the AMCU is also organizing among poor workers in their shack settlement communities, which have become no-go zones for police. For these settlements, this is a strike against the states and the haves, not just a union matter. Eusebius McKaiser, do you agree with that?
I think it's true, but I think Justice Malala is telling us old news, and it sounds more dramatic if you quote it the way you does. The reality is that income inequality in South Africa has been a feature of both pre- and post-democratic life, and we've known this all along. So while the Lonmin disaster brings it out in a very visceral way, it's not exactly news to South Africans. We know, tragically, that we are one of the most unequal societies on the planet, second possibly only to Brazil.
Ebba Kalando, you were mentioning how in your native Namibia there's shock.
There's absolute shock because the trade union
So it was
movement,
news to them.
I think what people forget, maybe outside of Southern Africa, is that the trade union movement and the miners and the mine workers were so at the forefront of the fight towards independence, whether it be Namibia in 1990 and South Africa in 1994. These were where many of our greatest leaders were cut their teeth. Ironically, leaders like Cyril Ramaphosa, who is now
a board member at Lonmin.
A board member of Lonmin and has 18% shares of Lonmin. So our firebrand leaders have now become part of the management structures that workers once wanted to to prevail over, to have more an equitable representation, not only for their workers and human rights, but also as workers.
So Eusebius McKaiser, help us sort the wheat from the chaff here. How could this have been prevented?
Well, the way it should have been presented in the first instance is that South Africa needs to have a better set of rules that govern the annual wage negotiations between labor and business. And the state mechanism to enable that, which is an organization called NEDLAC and many other outfits, are just not properly thought through. So sometimes you see agreements being made between union bosses and mine bosses that lock the wages in or the salary levels in for a couple of years, multi-year agreements. Now, obviously, on a year-to-year basis, as inflation increases, the cost of living increases, many of these mine workers want to be able to have a direct say in those negotiations. So the rules of the game when it comes to the season of wage increase negotiations, those rules needed to have been re-looked at for a long time already.
Jacob Zuma, the president, cutting short his visit to a regional summit to go to Americana, the site of that shooting, 48 hours after the massacre. He's promised an inquiry. He's declared a week-long mourning period. Jacob Zuma, who was speaking and alluding to South Africa's creed of these past 20 years.
We have gone through painful moments before, and we're able to overcome such challenges through coming together as a nation, regardless of race, color, creed, or political affiliation. We must use that national pride again during this difficult period.
Saifo January, when you hear the president talking about a nation regardless of race, color, creed, or political affiliation, is that how relevant is that to this tragedy?
Can you please repeat the question, please?
Allusion to the fact that South Africa is this rainbow nation, is how relevant is it in this case to what's going on?
Presently, because unions, the two unions that are involved with each other, there's not strictly of a color element where you can get it and say maybe the other union consists of a certain group of people or the other union consists of a certain group of people. It's basically the same people, same Sinhala, but they might come maybe in different areas, but they've been given this hope by one of the unions, that say, if you're with us, there are much more better benefits for joining us, and the other employees as well who are with the other unions are also having this question in mind. Now, why are you guys turning your back against us as the members or as our colleagues within the mine to be here for years, etc., etc. So in terms of the color, it's not really based on the colors, but it's much more largely centered around the belief that the new union that is now approaching the members and trying to increase its number is promising better benefits compared to NUM.
So Eba Kalando, the discourse of the president, is it in line with what's going on? Did he say the right things?
I think there was a lot of shock. I remember listening to him speaking, and it had absolutely nothing to do with not just the gravity of the Lonmin massacre at hand. He went on a very lofty conversation about nation and togetherness, and not really talking about that specific incident, the massacres of Lonmin. I don't remember him actually naming it during that press conference. It was all about, there's going to be no recriminations, but there was no taking of responsibility that it was an institution of state, that nobody has talked about that the 425 police officers who had been camping out at this copy with the striking mine workers, who could see that the atmosphere was becoming much becoming much more violent and extremely more tense. There was no arbitration, there was no mediation, there was nothing that happened until that terrible incident happened. How it is that the state and law enforcement agencies, with their domestic intelligence agencies, couldn't see that this was a volatile situation that was only going to get more and more explosive, and that there was a comparative experience at Impala Platinum but just before. It's true, one would beg to answer, how is it that more was not done to avert so much loss of human life, to avert such chaos that police officers were forced to shoot on their own citizens?
Eusebius McKaiser, did Jacob Zuma to you seem out of touch when he returned back to South Africa and went to the site?
Touch. I mean, we can analyze the text of that speech and overanalyze it. He's called them on a judicial commission of inquiry. We will know the terms of reference in the next few days. And the truth is that there are a lot of factual disputes here. I have interviewed many of the union bosses as a journalist myself. I have also spoken to the police, national police spokesperson, and the number of contested facts here are absolutely incredible. And so I think my fellow panelist, who is happy to boldly assert her version of the sequence of events, is quite astonishing. What I would say in sharing with her is that in terms of prima facie facts, not established facts, prima facie facts, it is very astonishing that the police could have exhausted all non-lethal methods of dealing with crowd control. So there are many, many tough questions the police have to answer in terms of how it handled the situation. That much I concur with. But I don't think anyone in South Africa or an overseas journalist is in a position yet to be able to boldly assert what the most probabilistic sequence of facts actually were.
I don't think that there was a sequencing of facts. I think that at the end of the day, it all unfortunately comes back to the point of those images that were just much more powerful than, I'm sure, the truth is much more complicated than this. There was only the police to deal with it. What were the mine workers, what were the trade union bosses and the shop stewards doing? But it became much more complex, and it became such a quagmire that at one point it just turned into violence. I'm not boldly asserting anything. I'm sorry if that's what you thought I was. What I am saying is that this is what people are having to sift through, and the truth will take a longer time to get to. But yes.
Eusebius McKaiser, very quickly before we go to the break, should Jacob Zuma have come home sooner? He's been criticized for that. All right. We seem to be having a technical difficulty. We'll try to patch that up. We'll be talking more about what it means going forward for South Africa, a country the whole continent turns to, when we come back in the France 24 debate.